Okay, everybody, thanks so much for being here today. We're going to talk about something that Carolyn had alluded to during her presentation, which is the different systems that we navigate during caregiving. And there's 17 of them. In our consultant training, I added system navigation, and I had probably, yes, and Jesus, I will post the links to the books again before we close today. I started thinking there were 5 or 6. And then in the training, I would ask training program participants, which would you add to the list? And then they started adding all these to the list. I thought, oh my gosh, I have an incomplete list. And then last fall, after my mom died, I had a little more bandwidth. And I started thinking through, what are the systems that we navigate? And then I had 10. And I thought, I'm missing some. And then I had 13. And then I had 15. And then I had 17. And I said, let's stop. That's enough. Here they are. I'm curious, as you look at this list of systems that you navigate, which one is a surprise to you? Yes, narcissism. Yes, right. I had debated about that. Number 17 was narcissism. I had debated about that. So here's how narcissism can show up in your caregiving experience. It can show up as a system. So think about discharge day from a hospital. How often has a doctor, a charge nurse, or a case manager said to you, oh, when is a good time for you to come on discharge day? I know you've got work commitments. Just curious if that's ever happened to anyone. And if it has, that is fabulous, right? It's never happened to me. They always just say, it's discharge day. And then you think, okay, yes, nobody ever, right? So that's the system narcissism, which is, it's all about the system. And the expectation is that you're going to be available. And the truth is, we make ourselves available because we're just not going to drop the ball on discharge day. So we juggle everything else for the system. And the system doesn't ever think, what's the impact on this family caregiver? We have been doing interviews around the 17 caregiving systems. And if you'd like to share your experience, we'd love to do an interview with you. I did an interview with a different Beth earlier this week, and she talked about her husband had a terrible accident after a lung transplant. So here's the situation. Gets through a lung transplant, healing, is out riding his Vespa and gets into an accident. So just bad luck. She's in the hospital trying to get everything set for him, right? She's advocating, telling, because he has very unique medical needs. And at one point, while her husband is okay in the hospital room, she steps away and goes into the stairwell and cries. And everybody walks past her. So they see her crying and everybody walks past her. One physician does stop, but that's another experience where people see us in pain and suffering and just keep walking by. Now you could say that that is discomfort, not necessarily narcissism. However, you might experience that in your family where there is a lack of empathy for your situation. So I have a long line of narcissism in the family. And I always wondered, would that show up if we did genealogy? Would they actually tag who's the narcissist, right? But I will tag them for them. So I have an older sister who's a malignant narcissist who is destructive in relationships. We have tried to work through that with her, and it's been impossible. So she is someone who is, she is what we dread. We dread her appearance. We dread communication with her. We do what we can, but we don't keep her in the loop. And then we dread that she will show up in the loop. It's a nightmare. So that narcissistic element means that we do things a little differently in the family and know that things are going to work. For instance, I am great about asking my younger sister and my other brother for help. I would never ask my older sister for help. Never. Never. Okay, so that's narcissism. Individuals, systems, but it also could be a family system. Something to keep in mind about workplace is that you have somewhere you go to do your work for your career. You also have a workplace around caregiving. So where does your caregiving work take place? It could be your home, the caree's home, or the nursing home, but you also have a caregiving workplace. As we think about these systems, I'd love to say that they are just one system that you manage at a time. The truth is there are multiple systems that you manage at one time. So hospital discharge, for instance, includes managing your work. Who's going to be your backup? Who's going to manage? When are you going to do your work? But it's also family. Who's doing what, when? It's also the provider. It's also the healthcare system. It's also the medical system. And it could be your nervous system. How is it going to be once we get home? Because things are different. But you're also managing others' nervous systems. Your caree's nervous system could be other family members who are very nervous about this. So you're managing their nervous system too. So it's different systems, but there's also subsystems within those systems. Wow. No wonder we're exhausted. No wonder we're fatigued. No wonder we're burnt out. Okay, so those are the systems. And I mentioned that we have been doing interviews. We're also creating visuals. So if you wanted to create a visual about what it looks like for you, please share it with us if you'd like. So for instance, this is a visualization of discharge day. And then I created a different visualization around what it was like to get my mom on hospice services. It was a nightmare. It was a nightmare. And I put little X's to indicate how many times I had to reach out in order for something to happen. And with my mom, it was 5 different conversations. And she really feared death. And she was quite mad about dying until she wasn't. And then everything was okay. The last 10 days, she was all about, I'm ready to go. I'm ready to go. Okay. So as we think about navigating all these systems, I think one of our experiences is forgiveness, and that can relate to our nervous system. So I read an article today before we got together that talked about the value of forgiveness. And I read this definition in this article, which I thought was interesting. And I wanted to actually get your feedback on forgiveness, this definition, and how it relates to system navigation. So here is a definition of forgiveness from a gentleman who's the director of human flourishing at Harvard. I mean, don't you want that job? Wow. Okay. I guess we could all be the director of human flourishing in our own lives. Maybe we'll get a promotion today and call ourselves, I'm the director of human flourishing for, and then you could say your family. So I'm the director of human flourishing for the Brown family. Okay, that sounds fun. All right, that's what I'm going to call myself, in addition to the other things I call myself. Okay, so here's the definition. My working definition is just to replace ill will toward the offender with goodwill. Forgiveness is not forgetting the action or pretending it didn't happen. It's not excusing or condoning the action. And it's not the same as reconciling or foregoing justice. One can forgive while still pursuing a just outcome. Okay, what do you think? Please feel free to share your thoughts in the chat room about this definition. So we all know, I think, typically that we think of forgiveness as the gift we give ourselves, right? We release anger, we release aggravation, we release resentment, we release bitterness. And I think part of it is, are we also letting someone off the hook? Because that can feel hard. I think fairness is a part of forgiveness. We're looking for what's fair. And sometimes that's what we hold on to, but it's not fair. It's not fair. And it was helpful to think about one can forgive while still pursuing a just outcome. We can still have an expectation around fairness as we forgive. So they aren't either or, they are possible to coexist together. Okay, so let's go back to this list of systems. What's a system that has been difficult for you to forgive? Workplace. Okay. Medical and provider. Okay. And after you share which system, I'd love for you to also share what's the challenge around forgiving that system. Okay, so Beth is sharing too. Nursing home that didn't test my diabetic dad's blood sugar for 11 days. And Tanika is sharing family that wasn't there when I needed them the most. Yeah, family. Okay, so Carrie is sharing, initially it was herself. I started to resent the situation. So I suppose that could be our nervous system. Okay, so the right decision for Jesus was to quit, to say, I've tried everything. This system is impossible for me. I need to leave the system. Okay, so Cheryl, that's a heartbreaking situation. Not being with your sister when she died because of COVID lockdown. Now, what's interesting about that is there are systems that are impacted by other situations. So our medical situation was impacted by another system, which was the medical system. So how do we stay safe during COVID? But that staying safe also meant families endured significant heartbreak that's hard to process and understand. And I think we have memories in our mind about what happened that are difficult to reconcile. Yeah, so Carolyn is sharing, I feel entitled to my anger. I love the new definition of forgiveness. Productivity feels better than my anger. So Cheryl has a right to feel angry about the circumstances that prevented her from being with her sister when it was the most important time to be with her sister. Who wouldn't be angry about that? Who wouldn't be heartbroken around that? So if we were to pursue, I want to go back to this definition for a moment. If we are to pursue a just outcome, what's a just outcome for a system that we feel has let us down? And I think what's interesting is so many of you are working toward a just outcome. You are looking at your own situation and saying, I want to make it better for another. I'm going to do the work so that it's better for another. So that's part of the just outcome. The system changes. The experience changes. The situation changes. Yeah, I think this idea of a just outcome is very interesting. And how do we define a just outcome within each system? Because that just outcome might be different based on the system. And I think when we feel like our care suffered at the hands of the medical system, that's very difficult to reconcile. And so the just outcome would be that it never happens again, or that the system apologizes for what happened. Something that we talk about in our consultant training is that typically we don't sue the doctor who apologizes. And an apology can feel like that just outcome. So Cheryl is sharing, she reassures herself by understanding the efforts of the health system to protect the larger population during the COVID crisis. So that really more global view is quite powerful, Cheryl. And wow, is that an evolved perspective? Because I don't know if I would be able to make that shift, but wow, what an amazing shift in perspective to know that the system was about protecting the safety of a larger population. That's beautiful. That's really beautiful. And Cheryl, you can say then that you were part of that goal to protect the greater good. You were part of that goal. You created the greater good. So I think we can look at the just outcome we're looking to pursue as we look to releasing resentment and bitterness and anger. If we were to think about bitterness versus forgiveness, what would you say is the difference between feeling bitter and having forgiven? I just want to say too that sometimes I enjoy bitter. I appreciate that we're looking for the sweetness of life, but sometimes I just want to share a bitter story. And I guess the bitter story helps me feel better. So I suppose it's this idea that there's a time and a place for everything. And ultimately our goal is to move forward in our life with a healing heart. Yeah, so Cheryl is describing bitterness. It's a huge rock in my stomach. It is painful. Yeah, sometimes it is that life is bitter. I suppose it's the difference between expressing a bitter situation versus becoming a bitter person. And maybe that's what we're looking to talk out now. We have bitter situations, and yet we decide not to become that bitter person. So bitterness is heavy. Forgiveness is peaceful. Yes, I would say that. I would say there's a very different energy around being a bitter person. We've all experienced that bitter person in our life, and there is a repellent. We are repelled by that bitter person. And that forgiving person has that peaceful energy. However, we don't have to be a forgiving person and a doormat to people in our life. So Tanika is sharing, bitter to me is feeling similar to hopeless and not really wanting to hear what anyone has to say. Being stuck in that bitterness and being, I guess, tone deaf to what others have in their life that also could challenge them. So if we were to put these two workshops together, 6-word stories and 17 caregiving systems, as well as forgiveness and just outcome, you could start to think through what's a 6-word story for a just outcome within a system that hurt. And then if we have this idea of what's our just outcome, it gives us this path forward. And the just outcome could just be that we do what we can to help another. And that's a way to move through life with a servant's heart. And that's a successful life, I think. Okay, so Sheila is saying, and Beth, I'd love for you to share your perspective around this because it's very similar to your perspective around the roller coasters. So Sheila is sharing, sometimes you have to leave people where they are. The train is leaving the station. And Beth, I'd love for you to share a little bit about your philosophy around the roller coaster.
Sure. It's really about stress management, which, all of this is applicable to. Where you are at the roller coaster at the amusement park and you are on the platform, you stay on the platform. Everybody else in the financial community, the healthcare community, the legal community, your workplace, your family members, they're all in different cars going around and around and around on the roller coaster, and you never get on one of those cars. You never get in with them. You stay on the platform, you can walk over to them and kind of pat them on the head or the hand and listen to them. And then you say, oh, and I wish you all the best. And you send them back off in their roller coaster car and you just stay on the platform.
We don't have to go along for the ride. We can decide what ride we want to take. Okay, this was fabulous. Thank you guys so much for, I guess we punted this morning. So thank you for punting with me. Okay, so let's take an 8-minute break and we'll come back at top of the hour.